Right, cool.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Apologetics TV show. It's not a TV show, but we have a live audience, and we have some friends here today. We have Addison and Amberly. Say hi.
Hello.
Hello.
And we have Ellie and Nat.
Hi.
And we have Trevor.
Hello.
And we have Gabe.
Hi.
Hi, Gabe. You joined just in time. All right, so our question today, our 17th apologetics question, which is crazy because we've been doing this a long time. We've answered so many questions, but there's still so many more to answer. It's wild. Today's question is anger a sin? Is getting angry wrong? What does the Bible say about anger? And what should we do when we feel angry? So this is a great question for today because there's so much going on in our world that can make us angry. Like when we hear that school's going to be canceled, or we're going to have to wear masks, or we're going to have to social distance, or whatever happens this fall, everything that's been happening to us with coronavirus, lots of stuff politically, all kinds of protests and things. There's so much going on in our world right now that could make us angry. So I thought it'd be a great topic. Somebody asked this question, suggested this topic, but man, right now with so much going on in our world that could lead us to anger, what do we do with anger? Is it wrong? Is it something that we should get rid of in our lives and fight to never feel anger, never to be angry? Or is it something that can help us? Is there anything positive in it? So we always start by defining our terms to make sure we all understand what we're talking about and we're on the same page with that. I didn't love the dictionary definition of anger, but here it is. It's anger, a noun. There's also a verb which is like making other people angry, I guess. But the noun is mainly what we're talking about. A strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. Basically, something that you don't like brings this emotion up in you. Maybe you're annoyed all the way to hostile with displeasure in the middle. I guess that's kind of a range of emotions. There's a light anger of just annoyance. Displeasure, you're not pleased, not happy, Bob, with something, and all the way to hostility, where you're acting back at it. The anger is causing you to do something in return. So there's a range there that's even in the definition of anger. And then, of course, we should define sin. What is sin if we're calling anger a sin? Of course, we're Christians, so we try to not sin. We avoid sin, and we define sin as behavior and thoughts that are against God's character. So the most basic definition is sin is anything that God is not, or not in God's design. So that's how we judge what is right and wrong, by God's standard, mostly in His Word, and by His Holy Spirit. And also, Logan's joining us as well. And then also anything outside of God's instructions on how to live, because God has a character, and that who He is and who He's not has a big part of the definition of sin. But there's also instructions for us in God's Word, and maybe that's like the rules. But any sin is anything outside of God's character and how He's designed our world and our lives to be His best for us. So where does anger fall in that? Is it a sin? Is it wrong? Is it against God's design, against God's character? Or is it okay? Or is there some other answer to, is anger a sin? When I think about this question, there are some challenges. So I write up these challenges. Some challenges to why this is a significant or difficult question, why it's not just a simple answer. The first thing I thought of is, didn't Jesus get angry? And we're going to look up that verse, that passage. A lot of times when we think of is when He cleared the temple, He's knocking over tables and driving animals. He even made a whip. He didn't whip anybody, but He made a whip to drive the animals out. So didn't Jesus get angry? And isn't Jesus perfect? So those two questions: didn't Jesus get angry, and isn't Jesus perfect? So that might lead us to an answer. If Jesus can get angry, maybe we can get angry because Jesus is perfect. He did it, so should we do it? And then, does God get angry? Is that a part of his character? Especially that goes really well back to when we define sin as behavior and thoughts that are against God's character. If it's part of the character of God, doesn't mean we can do it, or we can have that emotion and that not be sin. And then, isn't anger one of the 10 commandments? Maybe that might what people think. It's not one of the 10 commandments, just to give it away. But isn't there a rule in the Bible to not get angry? There are some verses that really advise against anger, and we're going to look at that. So that's a question. And then, isn't a lot of sinful behavior connected to anger, which is, I think, a really important challenge. Like, out of anger could come hate, and out of anger can come violence. So doesn't that make anger a sin? A lot of bad stuff can come from anger. Aiden's joining us now too. Welcome, Aiden. And then the last challenge, is there a difference? Is there some type of difference, different kinds of anger, maybe even in our definition, annoyance to hostility, but is there a difference between, maybe we'll call it a righteous anger, which is a right anger, an appropriate anger, and an unrighteous anger? Is there a difference there? Is there a line we can draw between different types of anger? So, like I said, I think this is an important question, one that will help us today in the world we live in. I think all of us probably experience anger. We experience the emotions and feelings of being upset when something happens. And this can be a range of things, like Ellie stained her sweatshirt with ice cream and she probably felt anger. I don't know where that anger was directed. Or it can be something even more significant, like someone gets kidnapped and mistreated. Like we should feel anger. We probably will feel anger at the people who kidnapped our friend. If someone, steals something from us, steals our bike, like we're gonna feel anger. So that's one thing to kind of identify, is anger is, at its most basic level, an emotion that we feel connected to something else happening. And so that's a good way to think about it. Like, the emotion itself, is that a wrong feeling to have, and should we try to get rid of it? So let's look up some verses. I'll assign these to you guys. I had a lot of verses, but I cut out ones that repeat. There's going to be multiple to some of these, so hopefully we narrowed it down to just 6. I try to keep it to 6 passages we look up. So if you want to read a verse, you can raise your hand and I will assign it to you. Who wants to read Psalm 37, 8? Ellie, I see your hand. I'll write it down. Ellie. Who wants to read Proverbs 29, 11? Gabe. And then we'll just have you unmute yourself and read it for the cameras. And then who wants to read Colossians 3, 8? Addison. Who wants to read James 1, 19 and 20? Natalie. And then I just have one more because I'm going to do the last one. Who wants to do Matthew 21, 12 and 13? Logan. Okay, let's start working our way through these verses. You can unmute yourself. Let's start with Ellie, and she's going to read Psalm 37, verse 8.
Okay. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself, it tends only to evil.
Okay, so where does that put us, Ellie? What do you think that verse is saying in regards to this question? Is anger a sin?
Well, it's telling us not to.
Right.
The Bible is.
So the Bible tells us not to do something.
And it says that it leads to evil.
Okay. So it says to refrain from anger, forsake wrath, for it leads to evil. So that's a pretty, if we're doing a pros and or two-sided list, this would be a check in the anger might be a sin box, right? It kind of sounds like it. But I think you did clue into something there with it leading to sin. Maybe that's a clue to the answer to this question. Gabe, you want to read Proverbs 29:11 for us?
Yeah. A fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise person holds it in check.
So, what do you think from this verse alone? What do you think? Is anger a sin?
I think it gives us a demonstration when it says a fool gives full vent, being like taking action in your anger and through your anger. The wise person holding it in check, meaning that like the wise person feels it, but they control themselves.
That's a great thought. Yeah, I agree totally with that. And that might give us some more clues to where anger lies. It doesn't say the wise doesn't get angry, but it says the wise quietly hold it back, right? So like you said, they're in control of their anger, where the fool is not in control. It's just venting out everywhere. Good. Addison, you had Colossians 3:8. You want to hit that for us?
Okay. But now you must put them all away: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth.
Obscene talk. So this anger makes it to a list of things that we would say are wrong, like obscene talk. We would definitely say, and wrath, malice, which is speaking or kind of hate for another person. Anger makes it to this list, which is surprising, for the anger is not a sin side. It says to put it away. So definitely some harsh words against anger, some instructions against it. I was actually surprised by how many verses that we're kind of seeing, not fully against anger, but that definitely steer us away from anger here. Okay, one more verse, two more, three more. Okay, Natalie, James 1:19 and 20.
Know this, my beloved brothers. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God.
Nice. So now we see, this is one verse that I saw show up quite a few times, or one phrase, where it says slow to anger, slow to become angry. And then this verse also had the part, the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Interesting. So it doesn't say like don't get angry, but again, it's kind of like a caution towards anger, to be slow to angry, and then also realizing that anger is not going to produce righteousness, which is interesting because we're going to see next, God does get angry. Jesus gets angry. This is the passage, I think, where Jesus displays anger in Matthew 21. Logan, can you read that for us? Matthew 21:12 and 13.
Jesus went into the temple and he threw out all those buying and selling. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves. He said to them, "It is written, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you're making it a den of thieves."
Thank you. So this is the passage that's most often cited with Jesus getting angry. Now, it doesn't say word for word that Jesus was angry here, but I think you could make a pretty strong case for Jesus was experiencing the emotion of anger, and he was acting on that in some way. He was driving out the money changers. He was tipping over tables. I think there's another gospel that has some few more details, but it says he made a whip and drove animals out. He caused some chaos and mayhem, and he actually does this twice. He does it once earlier in his ministry, and then he does it during Passion Week, the week before he was crucified. So I think we all believe that Jesus was perfect. He is God. So this behavior here wasn't sinful, but I think we could have a discussion on how angry he was, or how righteous he was in this display of his anger. He definitely did some things. It doesn't say he physically hurt any people or animals or anything. He did cause a mess, but he didn't, and it seems kind of violent-ish behavior, but it wasn't hurting any people. So it's not typical violence. But he was causing a stir. But the clarification here is that he did it in a way, he did it righteously, or he was acting on, sorry, I got a text. Jake was asking if we have Sunday school today. Yes, we do. Hopefully he joins us. He was acting on what he felt was right, which, if you look at what was happening back then, there were people being taken advantage of, and people were basically ripping people off in the temple, all in the name of God and worship, which made Jesus angry, I believe. And he acted on that by driving those people out of there. So I think that's another clue for us in as far as anger goes. Jesus would have experienced the emotion of anger, but I think he was in control. I wouldn't say he was out of control. He was in control of his emotions here, and acted in the way he acted. So yeah, interesting. Now the last verse that I wanted to look up for you guys is Ephesians 4:16, which is probably the most popular verse that's quoted on anger, and you've probably heard it before. And I want to look at it in some different translations, because they're kind of different. Sorry, Ephesians 4:26. I think I said 16. It said, NIV is how I've always remembered it, and it says, "In your anger, do not sin." So in your anger, do not sin. So it's kind of assuming that you'll experience anger, but the caution is to not have anger. To not sin while you experience anger. And then it says, which is a really important note, do not let the sun go down while you're angry. So it's also a caution to not be angry for long, because 27, you will give the devil a foothold. So that means like Satan will have something to kind of manipulate you by, if you let your anger hold on for a long time. Now I want to look that up in two other translations. In ESV, it says, "Be angry and do not sin." So this one, we've read a bunch of verses that say, be careful with your anger, refrain from anger, fools vent their anger, put away anger. And this verse is saying, in the ESV translation, be angry and don't sin. So is the Bible contradicting itself here? Like, interesting. And then it says, do not let the sun go down in your anger. And then the last translation I'm going to look at, New Living Translation, because we don't have a perfect, we talked about translations a few weeks ago. We don't have a perfect original language, because I don't know Greek and you guys don't know either. But we have translations which are different groups of people's attempts to make this make sense in our language. It says in NLT, don't sin by letting anger control you, which is speaking even more to this balance. Don't be controlled by your anger. It is, again, acknowledging that we're going to experience anger. And then don't let the sun go down while you're angry. So we had three options. We had in your anger, do not sin. Then, what was that in ESV? Be when you're angry. Oh, I lost it. I'm doing something wrong now. Be angry and do not sin, and then don't let your anger control you. So three kind of options there, which are interesting. The two other verses in Ephesians that I'll hit really quick. Let all bitterness, this is just a few verses down, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you. So again, like it just said, be angry, but put it away. And then later in Ephesians 6, it says, Ephesians 6:4, it says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. So it's a good instruction that we shouldn't try to rile up other people and get them angry. So this one is a bit tough, a bit tougher than I even thought, because the first thing when I heard this question, I remember that verse, like, in your anger, do not sin, which is kind of like you will experience the emotion of anger, but be careful with it and don't sin while you're angry. Be in control of it. But then we had a lot of verses that were refrain from anger, put away anger. And so it got a little bit more complicated for me than I thought. But of course, we saw that Jesus experienced the emotion of anger most likely. There's other spots where it says Jesus experienced all the same temptations we did, yet did not sin. So he would have experienced the anger and the temptation to act on his anger. But yet I think he felt the emotion of anger without sinning. Very interesting. Before we kind of wrap things together, I have a video clip that I want to show us, which asks the question, is anger sin? Same question we're asking. Let's watch that together and see. This is like a pastor's part of his sermon. But he asks the question, is anger a sin?
Hear that we shouldn't be angry, that anger isn't a fruit of the Spirit. But aren't there some things we should be angry about, i.e. injustices against people who can't defend themselves or things done in God's name that contradict the Bible? Crazy timing. This came up 3 days ago. I was teaching a lesson on Jesus in our Bible 101 class, and I was making the point that Jesus was perfect. So Hebrews 4:15 says, Jesus has been tempted in all the ways that you have, yet he did not sin. Or the passage I quoted before, 2 Corinthians 5:21, God made him who had no sin, so he never did anything wrong. And I'm just going through this. Jesus was sinless, but he died on the cross for our sins. And the person interrupted me in the class. They said, wait, what about the time when Jesus flipped over the tables? Ever heard that story? Jesus goes to church. Can you imagine if he came and he just grabbed the Christmas tree and he smashed it into the screen, and you would say, well, dude, that's not very loving. I thought you're supposed to be loving to people. And the Bible's answer to that is this, that anger in and of itself is how God often feels. Read the stories of the Israelites in the book of Exodus and Numbers, and God will often be angry because anger is not a sin. In fact, I would claim to you that if you don't get angry at times in life about the things that happen to people in this world, then that itself is a sin. If my little girl was up front here and you came and you spit in her face and you slapped her and I did not feel anger over that, how could I possibly be loving? If that didn't bother me when people were wronged and scarred and abused, when we hear just horrific stories, or if you've been through something horrific yourself, to think that God is just shrugging his shoulder saying, it's okay, I'll work it out. No, God is a great dad, and he burns with anger. But here's the fine line. Have you ever noticed when you're angry, you do things that are sinful? Like this happens to me all the time when I hear these stories about like terrorists in Nigeria and they just abduct these girls and they force them into sex slavery and marriage. I get furious and angry, and things come out of my mouth of what I hope happens to those people. Like, I should be angry about the injustice, but man, so often just like aggressive, vengeful stuff comes into my mind and my heart. And what the Bible says is that we should be angry when sin happens, but we should leave it to God's justice in the end. That our anger shouldn't lead us back into vengeance. And so if you're going through a divorce and, man, your soon-to-be ex is just treating you like garbage, there should be some anger in your heart, but you have to take a deep breath and leave it to God to take care of that. He'll defend you. There will be a day of reckoning and justice, and so we leave it just to him. There's this great passage to prove everything I'm saying in Ephesians chapter 4. Actually, in the original Greek, it's a little bit stronger. The passage in your Bible should say something like this. Ephesians 4, verse 26. In your anger, do not sin. It doesn't say don't be angry. It says when you're angry, do not sin. In the original Greek, it actually says be angry, but don't sin. So when something is it's just wrong, it's evil. And I love the examples that are given here. People can't defend themselves. Children, things done in God's name that just makes God puke in his mouth. Someone stands up and they claim to represent him and they hurt people in a church. Be angry about that, but don't sin. Stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves, and then trust that one day when Jesus comes back, he will make all things right.
All right. So I thought that was a pretty helpful perspective. He's pretty strong on the side of like, hey, anger is something we should experience, and it's right to experience anger at injustice or at things that are wrong. Anybody have any thoughts on that response? Anyone want to respond to the video? You can unmute yourself.
I heard, like when he was talking about how God is our Father, I was like, we learned about that in youth group.
Yeah.
So,
More.
so I was like, so exciting.
Okay, so take that specific piece. If someone mistreated you and your dad was like, it's not a big deal, like how does that make you feel if your own father doesn't get upset or angry when something really awful happens to you?
I feel like you didn't love me.
Wow.
You didn't get angry? So when God now she's dying. So God, it makes sense for him to get angry because he's our Father.
Interesting. That's a good perspective, right? Like we think about God's response in anger is out of his love for his people often, or his love for what is right. Like we think about like if there's a judge and on the stand is someone who's done something horrible and the judge gets angry, like a judge is supposed to be unbiased but like he should find the truth, right? The judge's job is to find the truth and execute punishment. But if he doesn't think it's a big deal, he's not going to punish the wrong behavior. So there needs to be some level of anger against things that are wrong to be a good judge, right? And God's a good judge. He judges right and wrong. He experiences what's right and wrong more than anyone else because he is perfect. So injustice does anger him. And so in that same light, I don't know if I'm as strong as that guy. Like we should feel angry because we are sinful beings. And I think it's so easy for us to cross that line into sin while we're angry. Does anyone else have a thought on that? Like, should we purposely get angry at, even if it's injustices? Any thought? Like,
I feel like if it is something like bad, you should get angry, but if you're gonna act out in that anger and sin, then maybe don't try letting out that anger as much, but you should still feel angry.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Gabe,
I
did
feel
you?
like, yeah, sorry. I feel like Logan kind of hit the nail on the head there. It was like back to Proverbs 29:11 where it says the wise person keeps it in check. And so I think that like a big part of the answer to this question depends so much on the reaction to that feeling.
Right. The actions that follow the emotion are really what makes it right or wrong, right? Like experiencing the emotion of anger is natural and normal and even right against something that's wrong. If something dumb happens, and some people are going to struggle with anger in a more negative way than other people. Like the way we're wired is going to maybe make this answer different for us. Some people are angry people. They get angered very easily. Like they drop their ice cream cone and they're just a raging ball of madness, and everyone they see that day, they're just angry at them. Some people are more prone to having anger as a problem. Some people are calmer. intense situations, just the way that different people are wired. So you can think about your personality. Are you more prone to rage in your anger, or are you more prone to a calm, collected anger? Any thoughts on that? Who here would say they're more prone to rage versus being, or more calm and collected when they're angry?
I would just like, I don't like rage, but I like cry, and I'm just like, I just bawl. I'm just like, ah! And
Okay, so maybe overwhelmed when you're
I'm overwhelmed.
angry.
I
So there's
get really
different
overwhelmed.
options. Yeah.
Yeah, I would whine. I'm like, oh, I got a chore. Oh, I don't want a chore.
Well, there's some things like you get a chore, like that's not an injustice, or is it? Is it an injustice?
Yes, no.
So there's some things we may experience anger to, some things that are wrong to experience anger to. Like if it's not an injustice, if it's not sin, if no one's being like taken advantage of or hurt, like it's just an inconvenience for us, we shouldn't go to anger with that. Like we should be in control that we don't even get angry when, I don't know, we have to do extra work or something. Like that shouldn't lead us to anger. Our ice cream cone falling, like that's not an injustice. No one is no one is being wrong unless someone like slapped the ice cream cone out of your hand. I don't know.
But
I
if
do
you're
that.
having like a really bad day and you drop your ice cream, then you're probably going to cause either really angry or sadness, deep sadness.
Yes. Yeah. Which is interesting. Like we should learn ourselves and learn our tendencies, and it should cause us to be more careful. Ellie, do you want to say something?
No, we were just playing with the mute, but
Oh, how fun. Like we should learn our own personalities, and start to learn like what kind of person we are. And we should, as we grow as Christians, we should be fighting against sin in our lives. And if we're typically someone who gets angry easily, we need to be even more careful. If we're typically someone who's calm and collected in our anger, maybe there's roles for us to, be that kind of like a judge person who's gonna, deal with justice. That judge person needs to be a calm and cool head. The person who's sitting on a stand and being a judge can't be a rageaholic and going off on people, because he wouldn't make a good judge. It has to be a calm person who does experience anger and wants wrong to be punished, but has to be calm in it, right? And so that's just the thing. Like when we say that, God is the one who's going to be experience anger in the best ways, because he is never going to sin in his anger. Like he can even experience wrath. Like God can even experience wrath. Wrath's a level that I don't think humans can handle of anger, because we're so quick to sin. We're so quick to screw it up. If we're mad at somebody for knocking our ice cream cone down, we're so quick to like knock their ice cream cone down. Like we're going to react in kind, or in worse, like we're going to want to get even or revenge or back at people. We're going to be quick to violence, to hurt someone when they say something to us. Like we like to escalate, right? So someone says something mean to us, we say something mean to them, they say something mean to us, we hurt them physically, and then we like hurt something they love, we kick their dog, I don't know, it just escalates, right? Then we burn down their house. Like that is what anger does. So all the Bible's cautions to being in control of our anger are so important, because it is so easy for us to sin when we're angry. And anger itself, I don't think is a sin. We're going to get to our short answer. But there is so much caution in the Bible, more caution than I realized, because I kind of remembered, like, in your anger, do not sin. Like get angry, but don't sin. But it's so easy to sin when we're angry that it has to be something we have to be extremely careful of. Only God can truly handle anger and keep control over it. And like the Proverbs verse, fools vent their anger. That's going to be us 9 times out of 10. Until we grow in maturity and grow in wisdom and learn to quietly hold back our anger. It's kind of like actually, I thought this could be another apologetics question, but kind of the same thing with temptation. When we're tempted to do something, the temptation itself is not sin, right? But it becomes sin when we give into it. Like when we're tempted to steal something, that being tempted to steal something isn't sinful. It becomes sinful when we do it, right? We become sinful when we steal the candy bar that we're tempted to steal. I think anger is kind of the same way. Anger is an emotion we're going to experience, and it's almost like we're going to be tempted to do something wrong out of it. Now, we should take anger and do something right out of it, like we should work against the injustice. If the injustice if someone gets kidnapped, it should cause us to, like, with the emotions, like, do whatever we can to get them back and help them. Logan, did you want to say something? Okay, I saw your hand. So it's almost like anger is like temptation, where it can, but in a different way, it can result in good. If we just like didn't care about starving people, like maybe we get angry that they're starving people, and it causes us to do something good. It causes us to raise money to feed starving people. Like that's a way that anger could result in something good. Now, if it just made us mad and we wanted to punch a rich person because there's poor people and starving people in the world, that wouldn't be helpful. Like, it just would be unfruitful. Our anger would just be vented, and we just try to express it and like, stupid rich people, there's poor people starving in the world, don't you know that? But instead, like, maybe we like, hey, we organize a fundraiser to feed starving people. Like maybe that's a way anger could result in good. But again, we are sinful people. We are prone to sin. We are likely to sin. So we have to be extremely careful. And that's why there's so much caution against sin. There's so much caution against anger. So our short answer, and why, it's way over here. I have a huge board here in my office. I don't have this giant board at home. I should sit on the other side.
Trevor wants to raise his hand. He's trying to talk to us.
Who?
Trevor. He's raising his hand for like minutes.
I can't see him.
No.
Trevor, what do you want to say?
I just wanted to say, when my sister has to do something that she doesn't want to do, or like, yeah, something like that, she like lets her, she does this, she'll go like that and be like, oh, come on, what? And like do that, and it's the funniest thing. She just she loses control of her body and just goes, huh? What? I don't want to do that. It's the funniest thing.
So she's angry and it can, it messes you up. And what you do. Right?
That's just like when my mom tells her to clean her room or something like that.
So not an injustice.
Not injustice. It's just funny.
All kinds of things can drive us to anger, right? Which is why we have to be extremely careful of, especially if it's not an injustice. It's probably rare that we will experience anger in an appropriate way. That's why the Bible is so cautious against it. Okay, so we have to answer our question. Is anger a sin? I think the answer is no. Anger itself is not a sin. Maybe we should say not always a sin, because it so easily can become sin. But it's the anger itself is not a sin, right? It's the emotion you experience of anger is not a sin. God experiences that emotion. Jesus experienced that emotion, but what they do with it is different. How they act on it, and Jesus will always act in righteous ways on their sin. That is definitely not a guarantee for humans. But the anger itself, no, is not a sin. So the rest of my why answer says, but the Bible gives lots of caution to anger, to not sin while angry, to not be angry for long, right? Like, do not let the sun go down in your anger. If you let the anger stay in you for a long time, it's going to cause a problem. And to not entice others to anger. So we shouldn't, be on social media saying things that purposely will get people angry because we think it's funny. It is funny when people get angry on the internet because it results in nothing. But we shouldn't post things just to get people to be angry. We shouldn't trick people into anger or entice people to anger, specifically fathers who like to rile up their kids or mess with them. We shouldn't drive people to anger. We need to be careful with that. And then the last part, God's righteous anger towards sin and injustice should be an emotion we share. It should be an emotion. We should be angry at sin and injustice. Those are things we should be angry at. It shouldn't be angry when mom tells us to clean our room. That's not sinful. That's not an injustice. Now, if a kid gets locked in their room for 2 weeks because they didn't clean their room and the mom doesn't feed them, that's an injustice, and we should be mad at that. But if your mom tells you to clean your room, no, you shouldn't get angry at it. That's not an injustice, no matter how awful you feel about it. But it should, anger towards sin and injustice should be an emotion we feel and we share, but very carefully. We need to be very careful when we feel anger. So it's an interesting question. It's again, like every time I try to look at the whole Bible for these answers, like I think I kind of have it in my head and I think it's a shorter answer than it is. It always gets more complicated. These questions are really good questions, and they're things that we have to learn and grow in maturity, because there's not easy answers to all these questions. So, Addison.
Okay, what when God flooded the earth, was that him being angry at the people for sinning?
Yeah, I was actually thinking of that. We could have done more study and looked at all the times God had wrath and anger towards people, especially in the Old Testament. But yeah, God was angry with the sin. It says about the people at the time of Noah, it says all the people had violence in their hearts all the time. So there was lots of violence, plenty of reason for God to want to destroy mankind, but to start over. So yeah, that was an example of anger. Now that wasn't sinful, because God was judging the people. He was exacting punishment on the people, and God is a good judge. And we say that, good judges extract punishment on people. We, depending on, we even have the death penalty in America in a lot of states. I don't necessarily agree with the death penalty, because I want people to all have a chance to receive Jesus. But we can see that a good justice system does punish wrongdoing, right? And so God is a good judge, and he has that right to judge sin in any way he sees fit. We don't deserve forgiveness. We deserve punishment, right? So Jesus's gift of forgiveness is a free gift that we don't deserve. Okay. Any other thoughts on this? Sorry, I can't see all you at once, so if you raise your hand, sometimes I'm missing you. Okay, if you're an angry person, prone to anger, quick to anger, be careful with anger. Everyone be careful with anger, but especially if you're prone to it. Anger itself is not sin, but it sure is easy to sin when you get angry.